I'm really excited about talking about culture with some experts here today. I think that one of the challenges that I see as I talk to senior living executives is that it's really easy to sort of get caught up in the day-to-day stuff, and it really misses the big picture. One of the opportunities I have is to get to is to talk to dozens and dozens of leaders who are doing really, really cool things and seeing things. And I think at the end of the day, we were sort of telling a couple stories, and I kind of decided which one I'm going to tell. But I want to talk to you about my two grandfathers. When I was 19 years old, one of my grandfathers died. And it was the first time that anybody who was really close in my family had passed away. And so I didn't quite know what to expect, really know what this funeral thing was all going to be like. I lived in Northern California. My grandfather was a pastor and a teacher in Southern California for many, many years. And so I went down, and it was kind of a scary thing to be there. But what was remarkable to me and what left a lasting impression was when I walked into the church where his funeral was being held, there were 1,200 people. There were 1,200 people sitting there to celebrate his life. And they weren't there because he was this famous, you'd never go find him as some famous preacher guy. He had just loved people and taken great care of them. About 3 years later, my other grandfather passed away, and I went to his funeral. And it was a little graveside service that had about 20 or 25 people, and I loved them both. I was probably closer to the one who had just this tiny little funeral, but I got to thinking about it, and I thought, man, wouldn't it be really, really cool when I die, not planning on doing that anytime soon, but when I die, that I had 1,200 people at my funeral because I had changed these lives. And so here in this industry, we have this really unique opportunity, and it's great to make money. I'm a for-profit kind of guy. Sorry, Sloan. And I think that profits are wonderful things, but at the end of the day, we don't sit there on the last day before we pass and think about how big our bank account is. We look at what we've accomplished, the legacy we left, and that's really changed lives. And so we're going to talk about culture today. We're just going to kind of have a conversation here. If you got a question, shout it out, because we've got these really bright lights, and so we can just barely see you. And so if you wave your hand, and particularly if you're over there or back in that corner, we won't see it anyway. But if you got a question or you have something you want to say, we'd love to have you join the conversation. So I'm going to just start with this question. What's culture mean to each of you? And Sloan, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Steve. Well, first, I've spent my entire career in not-for-profit, and it's important that we make a profit too, so we keep our doors open. So I just want to say that's not a bad word. I'm not offended in the least. For me, culture is really the leadership and the tone and the expectations of what the organization and how do we fulfill our mission. And I'm at Lifespace Communities now almost 2 years, and we had culture because culture happens. If you don't set it as a leader, it happens. And we had 13 different cultures because we have 12 communities in the home office, and they were all a little bit different. And so culture has been a major initiative of myself and my new leadership team here at Lifespace Communities. We're in 7 different states. We have 12 life care communities, large campuses, 400 to 600 residents. And so for us, our first focus is culture definition for our team members. In fact, a lot of my senior team members are back in Virginia this week at the Ritz-Carlton program, because years ago, I went through the Ritz-Carlton program, and it's a great program, but those individuals that stay at the Ritz-Carlton leave. Our residents do not until the very last, of course, part of their life. And so that program, though I really do like the Ritz-Carlton program and other programs such as Nordstrom's and Southwest, et cetera, they need to be customized for a 365-day operation and multi-generational experience. And so that's what we're doing today at Lifespace. We have starting with our team members. It starts really with the culture definition, the expectations. We go all the way back to the job descriptions. We incorporate fun. We incorporate daily team education and interaction. And that's our first start. But there's a second component of culture, and that's the culture of the resident population. For us, the magic happens by our team members. We have to start there, but we recognize that we cannot not recognize the culture of our residents, because our business is changing very, very much so, not only the industry, but our corporation. And so we need to be aware of both of those. And I'm a believer of two things. Number one, if you don't define your culture, it will happen. So define on what you want. And number two, the greatest flag bearer for the culture leadership is the CEO. And it works down and needs to be pervasive throughout the entire organization.
Right, so a little bit later, I want to really drill into how you make that percolate all the way down to the line staff. But if you could very quickly, and this is going to come back to both of you too, but if you could very quickly describe and say, what's your tagline? What's the core value that you're looking to accomplish?
Well,
or core mission, maybe.
Fulfillment of our mission consistently.
What's that?
Fulfillment of our mission consistently.
And your mission is?
Creating and celebrating lives of seniors.
Okay,
so
perfect.
It's broad, a lot of interpretation, and we had so many interpretations, and they were not always on task before we just started defining that.
Cool. So Tim, culture. What's it mean to you and your organization?
All right, I'll tell you what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean what's actually printed up in a nice parchment sitting in the lobby.
Okay.
Because so many companies do that, they use some of the very same words, same core values, and so forth and so on. But it's really what's getting into the fabric of the company. And I describe the culture as it's the mores and the values that the new employee picks up by lunchtime of their first day. And they figured out what really is happening by the first day is what the real mores are. Not what's published, but what really is happening. It's by the way their supervisor treats them, by their coworkers, how they are treated. It's by even the interaction they see within the residents and the staff members. So I think that is ultimately the guts of what corporate culture is.
So I really appreciate what you say, because I have talked to so many. So we could probably look at the mission statement of every single senior living community in the country, in North America, and say, man, that is really, really cool. But what I hear from people all the time is, we've got this thing that we say we believe in, but then it comes down to it's going to cost us more money, or it's going to cost us people, and we're going to do this instead. So just really appreciate that. So Lori, you're in this very unique situation because you have a brand new organization, brand new buildings, just opened your first building. Mm-hmm. So you get to start from scratch. And so different problems, I want to talk about how you do both those, but I want to just start with this really high level. Tell me about the culture that you decided that you were going to establish going into this before you ever hired your first person.
Yeah, certainly. Culture to me is pretty simple. It's really just the heartbeat of your company. And just like each of your hearts, without it, you're nothing. So we really focus on and talk about to all of our team and kind of what the spirit and the culture that we wanted to have flow throughout our organization, because it's kind of who we are as a company, is it's okay to be different, just always be you. And one of the things that we face while we're a new organization and we're bringing folks on, and we do things just a little bit different than a lot of senior housing operators, but we recruit people that come from the industry. It's a small industry, and it's trying to tell them, we're all Gumby, so we're bending, we're stretching, we're growing, and them being okay not to work within this really confined little box, that we're kind of fluid and flexible, and we're always looking to do things better, faster, and different. And our culture is just based upon, asking the question, why not? Why can't we do that? Who says we can't? Where's the rule that says we have to do it this way? Let's do it the way we want. And so we're constantly preaching it, and as simple as it sounds, 2 years ago when we started this organization, I would have thought everyone would have jumped on board and it would have been really, really easy, but it's not. And it's because people come to us and they're so used to wearing this tight jacket, like, oh, I can't move the fax machine without getting it approved, all the layers up before I move it. And for us, it's like, just move the fax machine, just That's simple. And so it's been challenging.
So if I were going to I'm going to start a little bit higher than I usually do, but if I were looking for a new executive director position, and I've heard about Avanti Senior Living, and I'd already been working in the space, and what would be the essence of, and so really what happens is you've got a twofold interview, right? We sort of think in terms of you interviewing me as the executive director, but in a real sense, I've got to interview you and make sure whether you're somebody I want to work with. So what would be the core essence that I should know about your organization? I'm going to ask both of you the same thing.
So there's a lot, but I guess in summary, most of the time when someone sits in front of me, what I drive home, because most of the time they've been qualified, they obviously can do their job from a technical standpoint. What I'm looking for, or is that person going to fit within our culture? Because we are so unique, and we're not the company for everybody because we don't have everything tied up in this big red bow and we march, all in a straight line. We're kind of fluid and flexible. So what I hit upon is, we have what we call a circle of trust, and once you enter into that space of the circle of trust, and you enter it whenever you become one of our team members, that means you're brought on board to do your job. You're brought on board because we believe that you can do your job and you're smart enough to do your job. So we're not there to babysit you. And we're also not there to allow the drama. Not going to lie, we employ a lot of ladies. And so we focus on, we just want to be strong, women who know what we're doing, or men, and do what you need to do, get it done, and don't look for someone to hold your hand and to lead the way. Have a voice. Be vocal, be you, and just be strong business leaders. And that's who we want. And the people who come in and expect to be told what to do, when to do, how to do it every step of the way, sometimes they're just not real successful with us because, we're looking for people that have a voice and can speak it, execute it, and not be afraid to get their hand slapped for having an opinion, whether it's right or wrong.
Okay, cool. So Tim, if I were interviewing, I were coming, and I were interviewing you, right? So you put yourself in my seat. Why would I want to come work for your organization?
Well, I think the primary reason is you would share our sense of mission. Okay. And I'd be right up front with you that this is a mission-driven company. And there's a lot of ways to make money and so forth and so on. But when it gets bottom line down to it, we're about the mission, of caring for seniors and caring for them in a particularly compelling way with respect and dignity and so forth and so on. And I would go right through our core values. But you bring up an interesting dynamic because interviewing is a critical part in being able to sustain a culture. And I'm astounded at how many folks in our industry are fairly inept and not very thoughtful about the interviewing process. Because it takes a great deal of skill, a great deal of thought beforehand, and strategy going into an interview to distill out in an interview if somebody does have a sense of mission, if they are driven by wanting to make a difference, or there's some other reason they're driven, and to really pull that out in a way that's legal, as well as in a way that's artfully done, and in the interviewing process. And as you know, an interviewing process can't be one hard or curveball after another in questioning. It's got to be a slow pitch, and a curve. Slow pitch, fastball. But it's going to be, you really need to be given some thought about it. And I find an awful lot of EDs and others who are doing the interviewing are, first of all, they have totally ignored at this point the core values which you want to be around, and are not even prepared to ask questions that might distill that out of an interview if the candidate brings those things to the table. Secondly, it would help distill out if they even aspire to work for a company that holds to these core values. And it's a two-way street. You're absolutely right. It's a two-way sales thing going on here. The candidate is asking, thinking, what does he want to hear me say? And unfortunately, the interviewer is loading and recocking their next question and not listening effectively, not listening to what is being said, not listening to and listening so much of the communication is nonverbal, looking at body language and everything else in the reply. But I have found that for executive directors to use that The best executive directors are people who really want to be influential, who really want to make an impact, and who really want to make a difference. And I almost listen for those magic words. I want to make a difference. And it comes out a lot. And you will hear our best EDs, the ones that are the biggest catalyst for sustaining our core values, are the people that want to make a difference.
So do you have sort of one litmus test question that you ask EDs that you look at it and say, based on this answer, 80% of the time, it tells me whether they're fit or not?
I have a lot of questions I like to ask.
I'm just looking for one.
Well, you know, I interview around their core values, a certain thing, which is respect, attentiveness, integrity, stewardship, and excellence. And I'll pick one of those out, for instance. Integrity. Yeah, I need to have an executive director. We have people all over the country. And for me to sleep well at night as the CEO of the company, I need to know that they're going to act in a moral way. And so I basically am asking questions. One of these questions would be, I said, most EDs rarely have a problem come to their desk that's clearly black and white. It's usually all full of muddled grays. And I say, what criteria do you use to determine the right decision in this decision that's full of muddled grays? And what I'm looking for, and I'll tell you I'm looking for a response that, first of all, acknowledges that there's an absolute moral right and wrong. And believe it or not, there's a lot of people who come to interview that won't acknowledge that. I'm unsettled if I can't get somebody who's really acknowledging there's an absolute moral right and wrong. Because then I'm not sure what they're going to do when in the middle of the night when a tough decision comes to be made. Secondly, I'm looking for that to use some wisdom in how to apply their sense of moral right and wrong and what they would do. And I ask them for instances, and I ask them to give me examples of when they were confronted with a decision full of grays and how they worked their way through it. And I ask them, what is the criteria? Some say it's the way I was raised, some bring a spiritual orientation to it, some bring all kinds of things to it. But I'm really looking for a thoughtful, coherent response. And that would be just one of the core values that I'm interviewing for.
Great. So Sloan, I'm an experienced CD. Heard you have an opening. You decided that you'd be willing to at least talk to me. But I still want to figure out whether I want to work for you. What are your core values? What are the things that I need to know to make my decision about your organization?
Well, I agree with much of this my panelists have said about it's much more than can you do the job, because we have actually hired quite a few executive directors the last couple of years, both that have been in the field as well as drawing from hospitality, a trend that we're seeing within the industry. And for me, we have redesigned the entire selection process and the interview process, onboarding process, and orientation process. And all has to do with our culture. So it really is timely with this panel. Our culture program, as I mentioned, we have defined and expanded its behaviors, attitudes, and standards of our organization and what that means in delivering our mission and our hospitality program. We've implemented psychometric testing that is just based on their fit with the culture program. And so we have a much more greater insight of the candidate in front of us, not just can they do the job, but can they fit to who our culture and who we are. And so for me, it's definitely, I'm selling the organization, but I'm selling the vision that I have for the organization, that we are not status quo, that we are in top 7. We don't want to be in the top 25 in the 10 years. We're a growing organization, and how we're going to grow. But basically, as that leader, how are they going to fit with the organization, and how are they going to help us move with the culture that we've defined? And that's why I talk a lot about the culture program. I talk about the value card that we have and what's on it, such as I'm assumed good in others. I mean, my grandmother taught me that. And it's always part of my job. My grandmother taught me that as well. We take all of our team members, day 1 and day 2 orientation has nothing to do about their job. It's just about our culture. So it is a true commitment to culture definition and education. And once I usually am finished talking to the executive director candidate, I know, is this person just thinking, oh, this is just another hotel hospitality program, or is this really ingrained within our culture? Is it? And it is. So that's how we usually find a great fit.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that I see leaders facing is how you actually percolate down the core values. I was visiting a senior living community. I won't tell you where it was. I was in town and out of town for a couple of days. I'm trying to figure out how to tell the story without giving away where it was. But I'd been in and out of the independent living for a couple of days doing some work with them. And I had a little break in what I was doing. And they had an assisted living building that was on the same campus, but in a completely different building. And I'd heard some really good things about it from the leadership and the community where I was visiting. And so I walked in the door and I said, "Hi, I'm Steve Moran, and I'm here doing this thing over here. And I got a little break, and so I'd like to come in and get a little tour of your building and hear about what you're doing." And it was clear that there was a new receptionist there because there were a team sort of doing some teaching and training. And one of them looked up at me and said, "Oh, sure, well, we'd be glad to help you." So I'm thinking this is going to go really, really good. But, we're really busy right now, so if you could have a seat, maybe in the next 20 minutes, we'll get somebody to help you. And I said, "Well, maybe I'll come back later." And I was gone. But this was in an organization where I know the leadership very, very well. I know that they're committed and they're passionate about creating this amazing culture. It is a wonderful, wonderful place. And yet there was this massive failure. So how do you make this perk all the way down, Sloan?
Well, for me, it's a deliberate process. As I mentioned, we look at how we select and hire and onboard individuals very differently. We have a daily huddle that's done at every community, every shift, split shift, and so forth. So everyone is getting the same message and education on a daily basis. It's also part of the job description. It's not only we want you to be a part of the mission. It really is part of our job. And if you really don't want to look someone in the eye and smile, that's part of the training and coaching that we have because we are a people-to-people business. And so what we have found for culture implementation throughout a large organization that's geographically diverse is that the senior team gets very excited about it, and the line staff, the direct caregivers get very excited about it. The element that's not that excited about it are the middle managers because it's more work. It's a lot more work to hire someone and that they cannot start their job until they go through day 1, day 2, and you're only offering that twice a month. You have to be more deliberate. I mean, there's a lot more dedication that goes into this and make sure that you do the daily huddle, not just when there's a home office person there, but it really is happening every shift, every day. And so what we have found is we know when it's not implementing, when that middle manager is not embracing it, and it's education. It's education. When we had a nurse that finally said at one point, "Well, that's not my job." Well, that's not our culture. And we were able to actually do coaching and ultimately discipline with that individual because that's not her job necessarily. However, it is part of being a team. And so how do we do it? By constant reinforcement. And if we have one ED that doesn't want to do it, it will be an immediate failure. But that's just not acceptable within the organization. And oh yes, there are hiccups and stumblings along the way of implementation. It's constant reinforcement.
I would say a litmus test would be, let me give you 3 types of scenarios. One is you have an executive director who's not hitting the numbers and doesn't embrace the values. That's an easy one. You make a change. Another one is you have an executive director that misses the numbers, but really embraces the values. You give that person another shot. The real telling thing is, what do you do when you have a guy who's hitting the numbers but doesn't embrace the values? And
so what do you do?
We make a change. If we can't get them to embrace the values, that's a problem. And that is a telling litmus test how seriously committed a company is from top down to looking at, because there's so many ways the culture can be short-circuited. And an executive director is pretty high up. And if an executive director, who is the CEO of a $25 million business for us, is not an ambassador and is not shrewd and not gallantly being an advocate for these core values, and he's a short circuit or she's a short circuit, we got a big problem, no matter whether they're hitting the numbers or not. So that's the telling part, because it's very difficult. We all know the interruption of making a change in a leader, how difficult financially and that is and so forth. But that is the pain you got to be willing to take to make sure that your culture will prevail.
So I agree with everything they say, but I also think a lot of it comes from the message that you send to your team members, and that starts with the design of your building. So in my experience, a lot of folks, i.e. old company I used to run as well, staff lounge, back of the room, back of the house, vinyl floor, it was valued engineered. That's not the message we sent this time around, because we sit and tell our people, you're the most important thing because you take care of our residents. What we did was we pulled our team lounge to the front of the building, right there with our executive suite area. And the finishings are just as nice, if not nicer, as our entire building. And we're very boutique style. In addition, we have a ping pong table in there. We have a dartboard, well, magnetic dartboard. Let me preface that. We have charging stations. We have iPads that they can check out for when they take their break. So that was one. So what I find is we can sit and tell our teams our culture, and we can train them, but it's also in how you walk it. What are you going to show them? Because when it comes down, you got to spend money on them. Some of that is in the design. You have to show your team you're willing to spend that money on them. So we do that. We have a full salon in our building, and every single team member that joins us, from a housekeeper all the way to an executive director, to our home office team, the first time they go in a building, they get a free service, whether it's a massage, a hair, get your nails done. They pick it because we want them to experience exactly what the residents experience. We give our team every single shift. We don't charge our team members for a meal. We give them a meal for free. And we train them to be proud. We call it Avanti pride, and have that pridesmanship within our organization, and stand tall and firm for who you are and who you work for, because that's what it's all about in creating that culture. Because we can go into these buildings and say, this is what we want from you, and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's what can I do to show my team member all the way down to that housekeeper that I truly believe in them and I need them. And I can tell them all day long, but sometimes I have to walk the talk and kind of show them. And so we hit it from a lot of different avenues.
So one of the things that I've written about and talked about a lot is this idea that being a caregiver is sort of really at the bottom of the barrel. And you can't, we shouldn't really celebrate that. We should see that as a transitional place. But recently I was talking to somebody who talked about this idea that perhaps the caregivers, the line staff, are actually good people and doing the very best that they can. And that means that even when they put your building in serious jeopardy and you had to hire them, that given their tools and their circumstances, they're doing the best they can. They just didn't do very good. So I guess the question I really find myself asking is, how do you make caregivers feel professionals? And I'm going to extend it just a little bit further. So I'm a conference junkie. Part of how I make my money is coming to things like this and hearing people's stories and talk and that kind of thing. But everybody here goes to half a dozen conferences or so a year, and they're inspiring, and they give you creativity. And then we take a line caregiver and we give them a few days of orientation, and we can't afford to give them anything more than maybe a couple talking points at the stand-up meeting, or maybe we don't even do that. How do you inspire your line people to be part of that culture? Who wants to go with Sloan? Tim?
We have implemented, number one, when I came to Lifespace, I was just impressed about the tenure. A lot of our team members, we are fortunate that we do have low turnover, and so we have people that have been with us 20, 30, 40 years and so forth. And it really is, how do we recognize? And we all know that magic is between those caregivers and the residents. That's really where the magic happens, I believe. And so we've implemented several programs, such as how do we take more seasoned individuals and make them mentors to new team members. That has been a tremendous success. And it's Is it investment? Yes. Is it a huge investment? No. But it's capitalizing on their wisdom, their knowledge, their maturity. Also recognizing great ideas, cost-saving ideas or ease of job ideas. And the number of ideas that come from the direct caregivers is much higher than a manager. And so those type of recognition programs and just a lot more fun along the way of celebratory opportunities that we've implemented. Some are corporate, some are just local communities. But that's been a real focus for us last year.
So I want to come back to something you said here just now because I'm really intrigued by it. So you say most of the ideas for improvements are coming from your line staff.
Mm-hmm.
How's that work?
Well, they do the jobs. I mean, if they know that they can stream a laundry process or how to label, there was something that came up last time through our it percolated up through our culture program where we actually award and recognize individuals. And it was just a simple laundry processing and identification of the residents and making sure that we didn't confuse the residents' clothing from one building or one resident to another. Very simple, very easy to implement. That person we put on a pedestal. And so they are doing the jobs that are, they're sometimes very, very hard jobs day in, day out. They know it best. And that's why we have seen the people that are actually doing the jobs have the best ideas.
Cool. Tim.
We invest pretty heavily to do this, in our folks who, we call it catching people doing it right. And so there's a concerted effort to really find people doing it right and behaving the way that you want to reward. Secondly, when we do get them, we champion them in a big way. First of all, we're great storytellers. We tell a lot of stories, and there's an art in even storytelling, and so they get someone. And so you get these people become not only heroes within their community, but they're heroes within our whole company. Every year we have a banquet. It's held, this past year was held in Orlando. Sometimes we held it in Vero Beach, where we are flying in the person that, this is voted by an awful lot of people in the company, the person that best represents each one of our core values. And there's a story that goes by it. It's almost like if you remember the Paul Harvey thing where you kind of tell this about the person and then at the very end you identify who that person is. And many of these people have never been in an airplane, never stayed at a hotel, and certainly never had this kind of fuss made over them with press releases back home and so forth. But it is a way for us to sustain the core value by promoting it, by telling stories about people who are doing it right and who get it. And it becomes part of who you are. And this is, it becomes very clear and very evident to everybody, this is not some corporate rain dance. This is what really matters around here. And so, yes, not every one of our caregivers is flying in for this banquet, but they hear about it and they know it could be them next year.
So, Lori, you've talked a little bit about the spa treatment. What else are you doing with your line people to make them love coming to work, to embrace your values?
Yeah. Well, besides giving them a really good place to come and work for and be proud to work, we do monthly incentive things as well. They can go get a chair massage, selected people. But I guess even higher level than that, because our company culture is super important to us, we actually have culture keepers. And it's not the executive director who's charged with that. It's actually usually a care partner or med person or a housekeeper. And those folks, we spend about, on our onboarding, we actually have, out of the week, we have 2 days that's specific to Avanti and our hospitality and our pride and our culture, and we really drive that home. And so whoever the culture keepers are in the building, they go through a little bit of extra time. And I actually spend a lot of time, I actually do a tour with them in the building, and we talk a lot about what that vision and why it's there, and kind of the philosophy of the company and the culture and who we are and why it's okay to be different and what that looks like. And then their jobs are to, and they actually are part of the onboarding process to our new team members as well. And they're another set of eyes and ears to that executive director, because we all know that's kind of where the culture can get real mucky, is in that line staff. And so the culture keepers are a part of that. And they take a lot of pride in that. And they want to protect it because they, too, have that Avanti pride, and they're there to kind of keep the peace with that. And another thing that we do, we have conference calls with our community. And instead of them coming from the home office as the leader, we actually pick folks within each week. It rotates, and there are folks within the community that lead the entire conference call for the home office. And again, because our philosophy is we're just there to serve you. We're not there to be the home office or whatever. We're just there to be your support team. And so we allowed them, our community level folks, to lead our home office or company calls. Everyone, it's been a nurse to an ED to everyone just kind of rotates out. And each topic we always have something on Avanti Pride is the first thing we always lead with. And then the second topic is leadership. And because everybody in the building is a leader, it doesn't matter if you have someone that reports to you or not, everybody's a leader in our organization. And so we infuse that knowledge into them constantly.
So, Tim, one of the things that one of the Ritz-Carlton values that we hear about often is the idea that any staff, any team member can spend, I don't know what the current number is, $2,000 or $4,000 to make a problem go away, right? So, my question to you, I'm going to start with you, is this, is how much discretion does a frontline staff person have to fix a problem? And we tend to talk in terms of caregivers, but it might be a laundry aide or a dishwasher. What can they actually do?
They do quite a bit, and they're championed for doing quite a bit and solving the problems themselves, giving quite a bit of latitude. In my entire career, we've empowered them to do that. Empowered sounds like, boy, we give them a lot of power, but it's expected that they would do that. And I have never ever seen them be wasteful of resources or not. And I've often seen them be very shrewder than I would have been, in how I would have resolved it, and very shrewd because they know all the nuances of that particular problem and they know how to go to it. So they're given a great deal of freedom to do what they need to do.
Sloan?
Well, as far as our culture program, which is called Living Lifespace, I guess this is where the not-for-profit comes in. We're not $2,000 to fix a problem, but every team member is trained during their day one, day two, that they have $250 that they can fix a problem with without question. And so there's a whole process, and there is an accounting that goes behind it because it has to be legal and moral, and it can't benefit a team member. It really is for residents and families or a vendor. We've had situations happen. So we have utilized that. It's been extremely successful. There's an accounting process that does back the house, but there's not a large process of if a resident has lost his or her wallet and cannot pay the taxi, it's an immediate fix. And there's not been a lot of money that's been spent, maybe a couple thousand a whole year. I mean, it's a handful of situations, but we call it the Lifespace Empower program under the Living Lifespace Culture program. And our team members are just floored that you would just give that to me to use to fix a problem? And we're like, absolutely. It's been very powerful.
Lori?
Yeah, so our response is never to hear, no, I can't do that. Everyone in our building is taught from day one to respond with, let me figure out how I can make that happen for you. And whether if they, everyone kind of has parameters around what they're able to do, down to a housekeeper all the way up to executive director. And if it falls outside of their scope, so to speak, then they have to figure out how to make that happen for them. And what that means, if could be going to their department head or running it up the chain, however that looks like, or just kind of using their brain to be different, to think, because that's why we hired them. And so we just really are big with empowering them to just make things happen.
You have somebody who blows it. And they're a department supervisor, not an executive director, not a line staff. There's somebody who should know better. What do you do about it? Tim?
Yeah, I would. Boy, I have a lot more questions I would ask about that. But obviously, people make mistakes. We're human beings, and so we understand that. And then we have a whole system to make sure no one's being arbitrary or capricious about somebody and their jobs and stuff and things like that. That's just not going to happen. But if I have somebody who's chronically doing that and chronically doing that, then I believe you got to act. And I think the rest of the staff is waiting for the leader to act. And if you don't act, there's a huge statements being made. It's saying, they don't really care. And I'm always conscious as a leader that there's this, I use the high jump metaphor where you have a bar and there's this invisible inertia pushing that bar of performance down all the time. And your job as a leader is to push it up. Not push it up so high that it discourages those involved in jumping, that they say, I'll never get over that, but just high enough to be a challenge. And that's part of what we do. I just want to make a comment about this business of corporate culture. This isn't soft stuff. I go visit a lot of competition, and because I'm visiting new markets, we're developing quite a bit now. And I have seen, and you probably have seen this too, you'll go into a market and there is an A team and a C+ community, and then there's a B- team and an A community, physical plant. And that A team is always winning. The one in the C is winning. So this is a people business. We're going to do a lot of innovation and have phenomenal physical plants and everything, but it's all a people business. And believe me, a corporate culture is a powerful thing to be able to attract the creme de la creme of teams. And that is going to be the differentiator. Operations is the differentiator. And if you have an attractive culture, it is going to get out that this is a good place to work for. And it gets out. And it's a closed community, and the word of mouth gets out, and you become the place to be. And it goes all the way up the line. But you have to be very vigilant that there is something pushing down, invisible inertia, and or somebody on your team is going to short circuit the culture, and you got to be vigilant about it.
Okay, so I'm going to shift here just a little bit because I've only got a couple more minutes. So there's somebody out here in this audience who's looking at this and saying, my corporate culture is terrible. They're not going to tell us that probably. But imagine if they did. They came to you and they said, we're terrible. We don't even know where to start. What would you say, Sloan?
To me, it was have a plan and prepare your stakeholders for investment, because it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be glossy, but it needs to be integrated into your systems and your training, and therefore you need investment. I talked about day one, day two for all my team members. Well, I couldn't just have that for the new team members. I had to take my entire workforce through that so they were all talking the same language and knowing what the culture was. So it really started with me, with my board of directors. What's culture? What's the importance of it? What do we have now? Where are we going to go? We need a corporate director of culture and hospitality, and we need to drive it because every ED will then be culture leaders, keepers. I think that's a great idea. But it really needs to be pervasive, and it can't just be the education topic of the month, because it will surely fail if that's the case. And I've tried it in previous lives where it's been, yes, this is exciting, but it's only been a certain percent that have grasped onto it. Our organization wasn't consistent, didn't invest in it, and it fails miserably. So to me, it's having a plan and investment.
Okay. Lori?
Well, I've had the privilege of starting from scratch versus inheriting. Right. So I would say probably like that's turning a steamboat in a bathtub. But, it's as easy as it sounds. It's not easy to even start one from scratch. In fact, I would probably say it's almost just as challenging because you're having to constantly infuse, invest, and educate folks of what that looks like. And when people come from all the other companies, and not that any company has a wrong culture, it's just most, Avanti's culture is Avanti's culture, and they're coming from all these other places that they worked for, and we're having to change that mindset and allow them to be open and free and be Gumby. And that's really hard, and it's taken some folks we've had on our team, for a while, and they're just now getting it. They're like, oh, it's okay for me to not always agree with you. Oh, it's okay for me to have an opinion. It's okay for me to question this policy and procedure. Yes, it is. And by the way, you won't get fired for it or blackballed or the big X on the back of your shirt, whatever fear you have with that. And so that's the biggest challenge that we face because our culture is just so different compared to most, because everyone kind of has a voice. And so that's what we face all the time.
I think I would suggest to that ED or the CEO or whatever, is I would take a look around my company, take stock, see who I think had the behaviors I wanted to, that emulated the culture I wanted it to be. And then I'd bring them all together and I'd ask them the question, who do you want us to be? Let's put it down, let's codify it, and then what can we do to intentionally shape our culture? We're not there now, what do we need to do to shape it that way? And I'll make it a collaborative exercise with as many people as I could and get them to own it and proceed from there. And they'll surprise you, they'll come up with great things that you hadn't even thought of.
Well, one of the things I really appreciate for all three of you is sort of this idea that it's okay to challenge what management is saying, because we learn so much from our critics. Much, as a writer, I love it when people say, oh man, I love your stuff. But at the end of the day, when somebody comes up to me and says, that was like the stupidest thing you ever wrote, what are you thinking? I learned stuff from that, and we can learn so much from our team. So I think we're about out of time here. Is that correct? Any questions?
We got a couple minutes.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? It's right here.
So Sloan, you mentioned that the culture begins at the top. And I'm curious how day in and day out you communicate down through all those communities so that they feel you. They feel the impact of you and your view of the world.
Well, we put together an entire communications campaign because we were somewhat of a quiet home office. Our EDs felt they were the captain of their own ship, when you said the CEO of their own building. But we had to let them know that they're part of the Navy and that there were going to be some Navy influence as well, especially with compliance, especially with group purchasing program. We were acting like a small company and we're really rather a large company. So to go then, how is my influence brought back? It really is the influence of the organization, but I have started, number one, I reply to every team member, family, resident that emails, calls, or writes me a letter. I'm very interactive. I do quarterly town hall meetings to team members and then to residents, and those are broadcast throughout all the communities within a 2-week period. There's just a lot more interaction. We've started a newsletter, an annual report, a lot that many of the organizations already have, but we didn't have a systematic approach. But it really then goes to the message. What am I talking about? Am I talking about the budgets? Am I talking about the physical plant redevelopments? All those type of things, yes. But I make sure that I interwove the culture program with it. Because again, every leader, every community ED, every home office person, every department manager, every team member has to be part of that culture. And if we don't live and breathe it, then there's a major challenge. So it's how I communicate and how frequently and what the message is.
I look, with 2,000 associates, I have to look for opportunities where it's going to be largely symbolic. And because I'm not going to have personal interaction on a regular basis with all 2,000. But it's something that I need to just watch and look and interact. And secondly, I think people get that it goes all the way to the top because they hear through word of mouth from others, this doesn't stop, this is all the way to the top. And they'll make tough decisions based on these core values, based on this culture.
One more back here.
Yeah, question, and that is, how do you know that you're tracking around your hopeful outcome? I mean, there's kind of 2 parts of the question. One is clearly no turnover is not good because there's some people that just won't get it. You're not changing. Turnover is too high. That's a separate challenge. So the first question is, what is that range of desirable turnover, I would say, in your employee workforce? And the second one is, how do you truly kind of measure that you are on point? I mean, you have, especially as your organization gets bigger, Sloan's is a large organization, Tim's is growing, Moran's will get larger. How do you know as you get further away that what you're preaching actually really is happening?
We partnered with Ritz-Carlton, meaning we paid them a lot of money. And their system is very metrics oriented. So our issue was what's meaningful to us. It's resident engagement, team member engagement, occupancy, retention. I mean, there's a whole series. I believe that we have 8 different elements that we measure on a monthly basis that we tie back into the culture. So it's important to what's to you. As far as the turnover statistics, I think we're 17.8 and the industry is around 25%. So you're right, what's the balance? For me, it was coming in as a new CEO. I've turned over a significant amount of my leaders, and that wasn't intentional. That was not a goal. It was a fact that I'm a different leader. We are bringing in a major culture. There are some people that just want to be the captain of their own ship and go into a different sea. And that wasn't part of the plan of the organization. So, but I had a board that's supporting me in this because they were looking for a change. They were looking for us to move in a different direction. So I don't know if it's a one-size-fits-all from our perspective, but I do agree that it has to be tangible, metrics-based oriented to pay off for your investment.
We do all kinds of things too. Employee satisfaction surveys. We have an independent third-party company do that. Resident satisfaction and family satisfaction surveys are an important part of it. If you're really on a budget and you want to know how you're doing and you don't have the money to pay for employee satisfaction surveys, independent third party, I always tell people one of your best poor man's way of doing that is take a look at your mod factor and your workman's compensation. There's a direct correlation between utilization of workman's compensation and dissatisfied employee base. But there's a myriad of ways. For me, I'm looking at the caliber of people we're attracting. Winning corporate cultures enable you to attract the best leaders. And if you're starting to see a real change in the high caliber leaders that you're attracting from outside, not necessarily just from our industry, but even outside the industry, then you know your corporate culture is getting after it.
And I think sometimes it's hard to say what are those benchmarks, because like you said, sometimes you need to get the person off the bus. Sometimes you just need to get them in the right seat. And so it's difficult, and it's culture there's somewhat of a science to it, but it's mainly an art. And for me, I know, we had 32 other buildings in the past in 10 states, so it's when you walk in the building, and we all know it, it's the feeling that you get. Is it your team's picking up, the piece of lint that's on the floor and proud to do so, or is it they walk past it because they're too good and it's not their job? Is it when you walk in and everyone's beaming and glowing versus no one even says, I'll be there to see you in 20 minutes? I mean, that's when you know you get it right, is when you walk in, you get that really good warm and fuzzy feeling. And it's an art, and it's just, there's no right or wrong culture. It's the culture that your company wants to possess. And as long as you walk in and feel your culture within your community, then you've hit the home run.
Great, thank you. Are we done?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you guys so much for an excellent conversation. Thank you.